was just 13, living the dream with the house all to myself for the weekend. My parents were away, and it felt like I had my own little kingdom. The living room was my throne room, the kitchen my banquet hall stocked with all the snacks and sodas I could want. I had a marathon of video games lined up, my trusty console waiting for some action. The whole house was quiet and peaceful, just me and my thoughts. I was lounging in my favorite chair, ready to dive into worlds of adventure and mystery. It felt liberating, being alone, independent, like a sneak peek into adulthood. It was the perfect setup for a weekend of carefree gaming and indulging in my favorite pizza, pepperoni and extra cheese. But then something odd happened. I was deep into my game, right in the middle of an epic battle, when this weird rustling noise started outside. It was subtle at first, almost like a whisper against the window. I paused my game, listening to the sound. It was late, probably around midnight, so my first thought was maybe a stray cat or a raccoon rummaging through the trash cans, a common enough occurrence in our quiet suburban neighborhood. But this sound was different, more deliberate, less natural. I muted the game, and the sudden silence in the room made the noise more pronounced. It was coming from right outside, maybe the bushes or near the front porch. My heart started to beat a little faster, a mix of curiosity and a twinge of fear. There was no reason for anyone to be out there, especially at this hour. I tried to shrug it off, thinking maybe it was the wind or some animal. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, just me being paranoid, probably. Besides, this was my chance to prove I could handle being home alone, to show I was closer to adulthood than childhood. I wasn't some little kid anymore, scared of the dark or imaginary monsters. No, I was 13, practically an adult, and adults don't freak out over a little noise. Anyway, I kept playing, diving back into the game, trying to immerse myself in the digital world. But even through the game sounds, I kept hearing that same noise, persistent and unsettling. The rustling seemed to weave through the explosions and dialogues of the game, a constant reminder that something wasn't right. It was like a nagging thought, impossible to ignore, growing louder and more insistent with each passing minute. So I paused the game, the screen freezing mid-action, and the room fell silent, except for that eerie noise from outside. I slowly approached the window, my heart starting to beat faster with apprehension. The curtains, usually a barrier between me and the outside world, suddenly felt too thin, too fragile. I cautiously pulled them aside and peered out. There, in the dim glow of the streetlight, was a shape that didn't belong. A man's silhouette, standing motionless in our yard. I sneaked down, trying to see through the front window, but it was too dark to make out anything. I was alone, right? I was torn between thinking I was overreacting and feeling like I should do something. I opened the door a crack, looking around, but there was nothing. Everything seemed quiet again. I stepped outside, taking a quick look around. The yard was empty, or so it seemed. I told myself it was all good, trying to calm my racing heart. I headed back inside, thinking I might just play some more games to distract myself. That was when my world turned upside down. I heard this noise, not the usual creaks and groans of the house, but something off, something more sinister. It was coming from my parents' room. I inched closer to their door, every fiber of my being screaming that something was terribly wrong. The door creaked open, and there it was, a figure just standing in the darkness. My breath caught in my throat. I was paralyzed, couldn't move, couldn't scream. My mind was racing, panic setting in. Then the man moved, taking a slow and deliberate step forward. In the eerie glow of the moonlight, his face became visible, and that's when I saw it. An unsettling smile, a grotesque grin that sent shivers down my spine. My heart pounded so loudly that I feared he could hear it. That was when my survival instinct kicked in. I spun around, full of primal fear, and bolted. I was running like the wind down the stairs, my feet barely touching the ground. I heard him behind me, footsteps thudding, a nightmare chasing me through my own house. I burst through the front door and into the cool night air. It hit me like a wave, but in the frenzy of the moment, I barely felt its chill. My legs carried me forward, the dim glow of streetlights a blur in my peripheral vision. My heart raced, pounding in my mouth like a relentless drumbeat. I didn't stop, couldn't stop, not until I had distanced myself by several blocks. As I ran, panic coursed through me, and I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being chased. The sound of footsteps echoed in my ears, a menacing rhythm of pursuit that added to my terror. I dared not look back, fearing what I might see. Minutes felt like hours as I kept running. Mercifully, the sound of those footsteps faded into silence. I skidded to a stop, gasping for air, my heart still pounding. I fumbled with my phone, my trembling hands struggling to find a grip. Finally, I managed to dial 911, my voice trembling as I recounted what happened. The police arrived, and we went back to my house, a place that no longer felt like home. It was a crime scene now. They found him, that intruder, still lurking in my parents' room, as if he owned the place. Seeing him in handcuffs, being led away by the cops. It was surreal, like a scene from a movie. But it was real, too real. The next day, with my parents back, the house felt different, tainted somehow. We cleaned up, but it was more than just a physical mess. It was the memories, the fear. Every little noise made me jump. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting the worst. It was a slow journey back to feeling normal. Nights were the hardest. Every shadow was a reminder of that terror. But eventually, I got through it, one day at a time, learning to trust the silence again, learning to feel safe in my own bed. That experience, though terrifying, became a part of who I am. It's a story of survival, of facing my deepest fears head on. It taught me to be vigilant, to be brave, even when every instinct told me to run. It's a reminder of the night I stood up to danger in the one place I always felt safest, my home. So there I was, a 30-year-old guy, living in this 2-floor mother-brother house with my brother. He had the downstairs, and I had the upstairs. Most nights it was just me, since he often stayed at his boyfriend's place. As you can guess, yes, my brother is gay. One night I was home alone, settling in to watch a scary movie. The house was quiet, just me and the flickering tube in the dark room. Sure, I was 30, but being alone sometimes still got to me. I tried to brush off any unease, telling myself I was an adult and shouldn't be spooked by a bit of solitude. Despite this, as I watched the movie, I found myself glancing over my shoulder more than I cared to admit. I don't really know why, but it felt like there was another presence in the room. After the movie, I went through my nighttime routine and headed to bed. Everything was dark, and soon after a few attempts, I was asleep. I don't know how long I was asleep, but I think about 2 hours later, something woke me up. At first, I wasn't sure why. Then I heard a voice downstairs. It sounded eerily like my brother, which was really strange because he wasn't supposed to be home. Confused and somewhat alarmed, I lay in bed for a few moments, trying to make sense of it. The voice was faint but distinct, carrying through the quiet house with a tone that was unmistakably his. With a mixture of grogginess and disorientation, I pushed myself out of bed and stood for a moment gathering my bearings in the pitch-black hall. The house was enveloped in a silence that was only broken by the distant, muffled sound of what seemed to be my brother's voice. It had a strange quality to it, as if it were both near and far away at the same time. Cautiously, I moved towards the kitchen, my hands outstretched in the darkness, feeling for the familiar walls and furniture as guidance. Finally, my fingers stumbled upon the light switch, and with a hesitant flick, the kitchen was suddenly awash with light. To my bewilderment, it was empty. There was no sign of my brother or anyone else. The room was as I had left it, with no indication that anyone had been there. I stood there, puzzled and unnerved, trying to make sense of what I had heard. The voice had been so clear, so real, yet the emptiness of the kitchen contradicted everything my ears had told me. It was a disconcerting feeling, being unable to trust my senses. I called out, "Is anyone there? Is that you?" My voice echoed slightly in the stillness, but there was no response. In the distance, almost as if in response to my call, I heard the voice again. It was a faint murmur, barely audible, yet unmistakably resembling my brother's. The sound seemed to be coming from another part of the house, possibly his bedroom. The uncertainty of the situation sent a chill down my spine. I stood frozen for a moment, contemplating my next move, the sound of that distant, familiar voice echoing in my mind. I checked his bedroom. It was empty. I called his name loudly again, but no one responded. Then, right after I yelled, I heard something drop to the floor in his bedroom. I rushed back up the stairs, feeling like a scared child, and locked myself in my room, trying to call my brother. I got no response. I lay there wondering if I had hallucinated everything. I don't exactly know why I didn't call the cops. Looking back, I should have right away. I laid down in bed, my mind racing with a mix of fear and confusion, waiting for something else to happen. But the house remained silent. The eerie calm was unsettling, yet, for some reason, despite the anxiety and the unanswered questions swirling in my head, sleep eventually overtook me. In the morning, I woke up to a text from my brother asking why I'd called him so late. I asked if he had been home, and he said no. He was at his boyfriend's. I ventured downstairs to his bedroom to investigate the noise from the night before, but I found nothing amiss. Everything was as it should be, with no sign of what might have caused the sound. I was left bewildered, questioning whether I had imagined the whole incident. The clarity of my brother's voice and the sound in his room continued to haunt me, but I wanted to believe it was all in my head. I'm a young professional, 28 years old, living alone in my city apartment. I travel a lot for work, and when I get home, I enjoy my quiet space. I'm used to living here and like it, but one day, when I returned from a business trip, my own space turned into a nightmare. So last year, I returned to my cozy city apartment after a 2-week-long business trip. My place was familiar and comforting, with just one bedroom, a living room, a kitchen, and one 2 bathrooms. Each room had enough space, creating a sense of peace. As I unpacked my things, I noticed a comforter lying in the corner of my bedroom. I had left in a rush and hadn't gotten around to washing it. The rest of my apartment was neat, but this little detail was out of place. While putting away my clothes, I thought I saw the blanket in the corner move. I dismissed it initially, convincing myself it was just my imagination, or perhaps a draft. In this instance, my sense of logic and reasoning acted as my mentor, reminding me that there must be a reasonable explanation for the movement. Perhaps it was just the way the light fell, or a trick of the shadows. My curiosity eventually got the better of me, and I decided to investigate further. Returning to the bedroom, I focused on the blanket. It seemed still now, but the earlier movement stayed in my mind. The unsettling stillness of the blanket now transformed into a test of my nerves and courage. It lay motionless, yet the memory of its earlier movement haunted me. Was it merely a trick of light, or was something more sinister at play? The expression of the situation tested my resolve, challenging me to confront my fears. As I continued to watch the blanket, the silence was broken by the sound of footsteps coming from outside my bedroom. My heart raced, and a cold sweat broke out on my skin. I retreated to the bathroom, the only place I felt I could momentarily secure myself. I locked the door just in time, as the footsteps stopped right outside and the doorknob rattled gently, then more insistently. I was trapped, my breathing short and shallow. The footsteps and the rattling doorknob became a cacophony of terror in the otherwise silent apartment. Then, the intruder started knocking on the door. I was scared stiff, unable to move or speak. A muffled sound came from the other side, but I couldn't make out the words due to the continuous knocking, like someone with mental issues. The knocks weren't loud or fast, but their steady rhythm only added to the fear. Eventually, the knock stopped. I heard footsteps retreating and the distant sound of the door slamming shut. After a few minutes without hearing a sound, I mustered the courage to leave the bathroom. Right away, I locked the front door of my apartment and started to search every room, ensuring whoever or whatever caused the footsteps was gone. But as I checked the first room, movement caught the corner of my eye. I turned around and stood face to face with the intruder. It was a woman in her early 30s with wide, pale eyes. She lunged at me without warning. Thankfully, she didn't have any weapon. I grabbed her hands and pulled her down, and she started growling like an animal. Then I recognized her. A year ago, I met her through Tinder. After 2 or 3 dates, I realized she wasn't mentally stable and ended things without explanation. She went berserk, stalking me relentlessly. I had blocked every form of contact and hadn't seen or heard from her in 8 months. I held her up and threw her out of the apartment, immediately calling the police to inform them of what happened and providing her personal details. They came quick, but didn't find any signs that someone broke in or had been living in my place. Everything in my apartment was just as I left it, really clean. Later on, I decided to sue her. The court gave her a restraining order, so she can't contact me in any way. Since then, I haven't seen or heard from her and hope it stays that way. This whole crazy thing showed me how important it is to be careful even in your own home. I learned to trust my feelings more.